Welcome to the On Garden Design podcast with Fleur and Sachi, where we talk about what makes a garden great and we try and inspire and make designing accessible to anyone who is interested in gardens, plants and chatting. Your hosts are long-time friends Fleur and Sachi, that's me, who bring a fresh perspective and their life experience to designing gardens as a second career. You can find us on Facebook and Insta for those who like their socials, and we'd love to have you subscribe so you know when the next episode is available. So Fleur, hi, how are you?
Hello. Well, I'm excited because we've got a great topic this week, and we're going to launch straight into this: design solutions for environmental problems in your garden. And we're actually breaking this up into two parts.
That's because there's so much to talk about.
There's so much to talk about, and because everybody has problems that need addressing in their garden. We're talking about your garden. That's right.
Oh, no, I need to ask you, what are the other problems? No, we're focusing on garden problems and garden problems that we might be able to fix by design, and also being really clear about where design's not necessarily to help you and you might actually need to go to other solutions.
Yes. And there's a big scope. So in part one, we're going to talk about problems that are environmentally based. So problems on your site that are
things that are there because the natural
side of things. Yeah, I mean, there's going to be some element of man-made in there, but things that are actually naturally occurring. So we'll talk about those. And in part two, we're going to reserve ourselves for talking about the layout and
the
structural
stuff we put there that doesn't
problems.
work.
That's right. Things that are really man-made problems of our own making. So the first part today is really on the environmental side.
That sounds good. And so we're looking at this today because winter is a time where a lot of that is just laid bare. It's in front of you. You can see the things that have never really, worked in your garden, or where you've never been able to find a solution for something which is an environmental problem. And those are really kind of niggling things when you look out at that desolate winter landscape that is often our gardens. Yeah, is that right?
It does. It strikes you. It's much more obvious in winter, and also winter's a really good time to assess it because you can address it more easily.
Except when it's freezing cold and raining like yesterday.
Well, when the soil's a little bit frozen, it is hard to dig, but at least you're not competing with branches, a lot of foliage, flowers. It's a lot harder to get in and do a kind of maintenance on your garden, overhaul maintenance, digging some trenches, fixing up some things. It's much harder when it's a lot of foliage that's competing with you.
Absolutely. So we're really about how can we improve aesthetic and functionality through some design solutions. I think we should just dive in.
Let's do it. Okay, where should we start?
I would like to start with my favourite, which is, and I think this is something that everyone experiences in Canberra, the dry, shady spaces. And I guess there's two types of shady spaces, which are hard, but there's damp, shady spaces, which I always think of, you just chuck some ferns in, you'll be right. And then there's the dry ones where everything you try and put in there just eventually shrivels up and dies.
Yeah, and you really see this with the massive amount of gum trees that people have in their back gardens, or even, sort of verge planting. Those gum trees, nothing grows under them.
Well, that's also because they, what is it? I always forget that toxin that they exude that also kills things underneath them to stop other plants from competing.
Yes, I forget the name too. It's sort of like
I will Google it while you talk.
Now, alethopathic just came to mind.
That's it.
Thank you.
That's it, because every time I put in competition Gumtree, I was getting things like competition leotards. It was not helping.
And I don't think leotards are going to be a design solution for us here.
No, I don't think they are either. I'm sure someone could come up with something, though, if we put out the call. Now,
so often these dry, shady spaces could be dealt with a hardscaping solution. And it's hardscaping. You think about, you don't want to disrupt the root zone of the tree that you're under, but you want to make it a nice place. So sometimes the idea of just actually topping up with some gravel mulch, putting in a nice park bench, or a nice sort of garden seat. Maybe it's even a space where you can have a little bird bath or a sculpture, something like that can be an area to be enjoyed and admired and neatened up, that doesn't necessarily have to be masses of planting.
That's right. And I guess the benefit of having a dry, shady space is you're not feeling like you're walking into a little damp, moist, corner. You actually, in summer, a dry, shady space is a nice place to be. because it's a bit cooler than anywhere else. And I was also thinking under the eaves can often be a dry, shady space, or around the side of, say, a shed or some kind of structure. And those places as well, having something that doesn't necessarily, I guess, draw the eye as a focal point, but at least gives some interest in that little spot, or some kind of a screening wall, you know, that screens, I guess, whatever that structure might be, but then isn't something that has to grow and that you're constantly looking after.
Yes. I was just thinking I had a very, very harsh sunny area that is under the eaves, and I put 2-cream in there. Now, unfortunately, I mean, the 2-cream are happy to not be to get a lot of water. They're happy to be under the eaves in that regard, but they're stretching out to get
to the sun. Yeah.
And so it's a really bad choice. But however, I think things like succulents would be much happier there because they don't need a huge amount of water, and they're quite happy, and also they quite benefit from not having the frost fall on them.
Yeah,
as well.
That's
they're better
so
off
true.
having. So when you look at those sort of areas, you think, well, what plants actually will benefit, not just cope, but do quite well. And of course, if you want to fill the space with a bit of green, things like liriope, they are very, very.
They're the cockroaches of the plant world.
The cockroaches. They do full sun, they do full shade, they do dry, they do wet.
That's right.
They're a really good solution. But what I think really the best way to look at some of those spaces is about pebble mulching up, and make it a place where you want to be, and
or you want to look at.
Yeah.
That's right. So using things other than plants. But as we said, something like a liriope, which is really hardy, they're probably a couple of the choices for dry shade. And in fact, I'm trying out a New Zealand flax as well, which is a bit frost tender in my shade because it's a really lush green leafy thing. So we'll see. I'll report back on whether that survives, because at the moment it's doing what the hostas do, and it's providing excellent snail lettuce. So we'll see whether that survives. So what are the other things? How about damp spaces? That's the opposite, obviously.
Yeah, that's right. And damp spaces, I guess the first thing you need to look at from a design perspective is there something that's leading to that damp that we can address, and that is a drainage issue.
Yep.
And so,
or maybe someone's just peeing there a lot.
Oh dear.
I'm thinking of someone with a lemon tree. You know, there's just something about lemon tree and boys.
You see that on Facebook too, and I'm not just talking about boys.
Well, true, that is true. I have seen that as well, but I don't think we want to go down that path. So let's go back to
drainage, and we're talking about wet soil here.
That's from rain.
From rain,
and natural moisture.
That's right. So with drainage, I think this is a really good one to sort of unpack, because every garden is going to have some area where you need to actually improve the drainage, and there's ways to do this without a lot of overhaul or expense. And the one way that I often address a small sort of drainage issue is the French drains.
What is a French drain?
Fancy word for an unfancy solution.
I was about to say it's shaped like a croissant.
And why they've called French drains, I have no idea. Basically, you dig a ditch, you put in a piece of slotted ag pipe, wrap it all up in
a stocking,
geotextile fabric, and then fill the area in with a pebble that water can get through, and then you can put a soil coating on top. You can put grass back on top. You can put garden beds around there. You can make a little path.
Perfect.
It's a great solution, and the whole point of this exercise is that you move the water from that damp spot to another point where you want the water to be.
So if you've got a dry shady space next to your damp shady space, you've got a ready-made solution, and it's win-win.
That's it. And the thing is, you can manipulate the ground to take the water where you want it.
Yeah.
And another option, of course, is digging through swales, rises and bumps, which would create, basically, it's a sort of snaking-like channel system to move the water around your block.
So some kind of contouring.
Yeah, that's right. You build it into the contours.
Why don't they just say that? A swale, a French drain. There's a whole new jargon that goes with this. I think we should change things to, let's be on a simplification drive.
Well, you see, if you use the word French drain, you could charge more for that.
Maybe. Landscapers take note.
Okay, would you go to a French restaurant and order a snail? No, but an escargot, it is good. You pay for that.
You will. The nomenclature means
In fact,
more money.
if your host had a collection of escargot, you'd actually be considered quite fashionable.
I'm not convinced my escargot are in the fashionable stakes. But anyway, let's get back to the damp spot. So what else can you do in a damp spot once you've, if you can't put in a drain for whatever reason?
Well, water gardens. Fabulous. A lot of people are quite interested in frog ponds and creating habitat zones in their garden. That's right, little mini wetland in your garden. You can block up the sides with some really good boulders, put in sort of areas where wildlife it's quite a shallow space, but when the water does come, it fills up a little bit, but it's got space. And put in some water-loving plants around the area.
And there's some fantastic water-loving plants, which I wish I could grow more of, quite frankly. Some of those fabulous irises, the water irises. And I've had Louisiana irises are one.
Yeah.
Then there's some other versions as well, which I can't quite remember.
Yeah, Japanese water iris.
Yeah, Japanese water iris. That was the one I was thinking
Very
about.
pretty.
Stunning. Yes. Absolutely stunning. And then there's a whole bunch of Australian natives as well that grow quite well in the domestic environment too.
Yes, that's right. And it really does create a lovely little nature spot. So you will attract frogs and lizards and
you can't have too many frogs and lizards in your garden.
That's right. Even a place for the bees to drink. If it's nice shallow, you put in a lot of sort of flat level rock so that these little critters can land safely and have a little bit of a drink.
That's right. And I have to say, I am enjoying in my garden, when I sit in my office at the moment, I have a family of bowerbirds that loves our pond. So attracting those kind of things, and if you're someone who works at home, it provides an endless display of silliness that the birds get up to while they're drinking. It's just fantastic. And they get so close because they don't actually see you there. Anyway, that's an aside. So
that's lovely.
Let's keep going, because the other thing I wanted to circle back to, because we were talking about people peeing on lemon trees.
I don't think we were.
Well, I raised it. Okay, I raised it. But I did want to come back to, and I'm not quite sure whether this fits into an environmental problem, but I'm going to put it in the environmental problem basket. So I have a dog, and a dog needs to relieve themselves in the garden.
Oh, this is a good one.
So how do we deal with that? What design solutions are there for people who have dogs?
Yeah, look, this is a great one, because if you have lawn and dogs pee on lawn, you have these patches all over the lawn.
You have a patchwork lawn.
You have a patchwork lawn, yeah. Now, I'll just give you a small anecdote about dogs and some of the occupational health and safety measures of a landscape designer. So I've been to a couple of yards now where people have dogs, and they'll have an area where the dog just poops randomly, and
that's the technical term.
That's it.
Defecates.
And I have to say, it's like walking through a minefield, because as a landscape designer, I need to be in the garden, walking through, measuring, understanding, right through the garden beds, assessing everything. And I tell you, the hazards of just poop everywhere is just
the landmines that you could potentially step on.
It's very distracting.
And they're not as big as cow pats, so they're harder to avoid.
And they really stick.
Yes, they do stick, and they stink.
They stick and they stink.
I don't think we need to unpack this.
No. But what I want to present as a solution here for those dog owners, and I went to a lady's yard. Because I don't have a dog, so I hadn't really thought this through. And she had a system called SubPod. It's a product, and it's a composting system that you sort of bury underground, and it has maybe about 5 centimetres of the box. Think of a box that gets sunk into the ground, about 5 centimetres, sits above the ground level. It just lets a bit of air into it, and it has a lid over the top in good garden shades of, khaki. So it's camouflage. And she had one sort of sunken into a vegetable patch area, which was for organic kitchen waste. And she had another one sunk further back in the garden, and that was for dog poop waste.
Oh, that's a great idea.
And it was brilliant,
you
because
just don't want to mix them up.
No, you don't, because you don't want to have anything that's made from dog poo going onto your vegetable, anything that's productive you're going to eat. But the idea is that it gave her a place to put that dog poo. It got decomposted. It didn't smell, and it was just contained, and it was neat and tidy. And I thought, what a brilliant system.
Perfect.
So if you're looking for, helping to manage without lots of bags and just a natural system, then have a look at that. I thought it was really effective.
That sounds like a great solution. You just need a teenager then that you can pay to pick it all up and put it into the compost. But that sounds like a really good one, because there really is no other solution other than you take your dog out and you let it, relieve itself on other people's lawns, and that's not a very neighbourly thing to do.
Oh, no.
No, exactly. So we're not going to do that.
We are not going to do that.
Okay, let's go on to the next problem. Oh, this is another one of my favourites, and something I think most people who are gardeners have experienced at least once in their life. Bamboo and ivy coming over from the neighbours. How do I deal with this?
I enjoy a bit of social media scrolling. As you do.
She's fessing up now.
As you do. And I'd have to say, on all the different sites that I follow, garden-related sites, there would be every day I've got a difficult neighbour. They've got bamboo. It's
bamboo
growing through
absolutely.
or they've got privet hanging over their fence. How can I deal with
the berries
this?
and the birds?
Yeah, and and invariably someone will make a comment that says, "Why don't you go and talk to your neighbour?" However, in some cases people feel they can't. So if you can't, and if it's creeping onto your side, what are some of the solutions? How can we control it?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think I'm drawing a blank, other than obviously there's huge amounts of effort you can put into controlling these things. You can poison it, you can cut it back, you can dig it right out, put in some kind of what do I want? I'm trying to shield is not the right thing, but some kind of a root barrier, exactly, to stop things from growing over. But generally they won't be fully successful.
No, they really don't work that well.
That's right.
And in my experience, I find that anything like that where you're trying to completely dig down on your side of the fence and stop the encroachment, it's really not successful.
The roots are just amazingly resilient. They just keep coming back and keep trying. And I guess the only other option is you become a guerrilla gardener and you do a midnight raid and you hack it out of the neighbour's garden. But that may disrupt neighbourly relations.
Yeah, look, just for the official purposes of this podcast, I'd say we're not
condoning that. No, not at all. Not at all.
However, I sort of go back to I had a very effective lecturer at uni who was really into the legal sides of these issues, and he was quite clear on saying that if you do, and this is sort of listeners beware. So if you do poison or hack at a plant that's on your side of the fence to the point where you kill the mother plant, then you're liable, and your neighbour can actually sue you for that. So you do need to be somewhat considerate about how you manage this, because if you do cause that damage of the mother plant, then you could have quite a degradation in neighbourly relations.
Absolutely. I think, though, you've also got to keep in mind things like privet and the English ivy are also declared weed species, so they're going to have a pretty hard time backing up their defence of their weed species being, killed in their garden if you do something. So I think there's a bit of a quid pro quo there. But I guess the key thing is that there really are no design solutions for these two.
Yeah, I think there aren't any really great solutions. However, I just sort of thought of one as you were saying, and that is I was in a garden where the English ivy was rampant. However, it was covering the fence in quite an artistic way.
It can be beautiful. Yes, that's right.
And so I talked to the clients and said, look, you've got this fence. If you pull all that ivy off, then you're going to have another problem, which is just an ugly fence. So let's work with what we have here, and let's just keep it under control, because all of these things, you can control them if you keep on top of them, and then you've given yourself a solution with just a little bit of maintenance overhead.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I had exactly that scenario. I had English ivy coming over a fence, And the challenge with ivy is you keep it back to a layer. Don't let it grow masses of layers because it will just keep layering itself and the stuff underneath dies back. And so if you can keep it to that single layer, means you don't lose space in your garden, but you can actually have a very beautiful green wall as a result, wherever that may be. Anyway, I think we've covered that one enough.
Yes.
Don't you?
There's one big one I really want to hit on.
Oh, yeah.
And that is slope.
Yes.
I think because we're talking about environmental conditions here, and slope is, I'd have to say, it adds complexity to terrain, definitely. However, I see it as an exhilarating opportunity in a design sense.
Only a designer would say that.
Because it's interesting how I'll go to a garden and there'll be this wonky sloped lawn, which is unusable.
And so hard to mow.
Can't mow. It's just difficult to walk on. Any path that's sloping, it's difficult.
They are.
However, slope presents an opportunity to have more of a journey and a meander through a garden by creating levels.
That's right.
So I really encourage you to look at slope as an opportunity and say, right, we're going to create maybe, in the whole slope of the garden, we're going to create 3 levels that are usable, and we're going to have some terrace system between the levels. And the transitions between those 3 levels become exciting. So let's think, let's say, what do I want to feel as I move between the 2 levels? Let's really focus on that transition. Do we put up an arbour here? We've got beautiful sweeping steps. Are we we actually want to make that transition between the levels of this slope and journey in itself, an experience in itself.
I was about to say, you could actually, using those levels, you could have, the first one might be a productive garden because it's closer to the house. The next one might be something else. The one further up might be something else. You might use it to create a bit of depth in your garden as well, drawing the eye up to the top level or down to the bottom level to create that length if you're missing length in your garden.
Yes.
There's all sorts of opportunities, aren't there?
There really is. And also when you think about slope, from a design perspective, we want to make sure that your garden doesn't just drop away, unless it's leading to a magnificent borrowed view, of course.
Yeah,
that's a different story.
That's right.
And then we want to frame it.
Not all of us live in the Blue Mountains.
No, that's right. And so think about this idea of framing. So as you're moving down through your slope, through your terraces, you're having this sort of sense of enclosure where maybe hedging or trees come up to a framing of that pathway, and then it opens up as you come to the next level. And so you want to have this open and close sensation. And also what you want to have is this idea that maybe there's that focal point at the end of the garden, but also some vertical interest that creates this idea that the garden doesn't just drop away.
Yep.
You might have some very big trees that are at the far point at the bottom of the slope.
That bring your eye up.
Yep. You might want to have hedging that comes in a little closer, that's higher, but doesn't make the whole thing just fall away. Just recede, yeah. So the idea that if the hedging's up close and you go through that hedging and then you go to the next level, then you've got this whole new vista.
Yes.
And that's exciting.
Absolutely.
So make it exciting.
The other thing that just struck me is when we talk about terraces, immediately the thing that comes into my mind, and I have no doubt lots of other people think like this, they think quite rigid, almost linear terraces. Terraces don't need to be like that. They can follow the contours of your garden. And so if you don't have a garden that has very structured or formal lines to it or is very linear, think about how do you follow natural contours, and then it becomes much more, particularly when you're doing some of this, say, in a native planted garden, which doesn't lend itself so much to really linear and, I guess, architectural kind of structure. Some of those natural forms make it feel much more like it's part of the landscape again as well.
Yes, a sort of a leaning dry stacked rock wall.
Yes.
That creates the terracing that makes it look, and then you can have plants all spilling within the gaps in those dry stone walls.
And over the top as well to
really
soften it
softens
all.
it. Yeah,
that's
There's
right.
a lot of tricks there, but I'd say if you've got slope, look at it as an opportunity and celebrate it. It really makes a garden so much more interesting. And if you don't have slope, like my garden's very flat, I have to look for other ways to make it interesting because it doesn't have the benefit of slope.
That's a really good point. Yeah, absolutely. Now, one last thing. Let's sneak it in before we wrap this up. Difficult soil and rock. And everyone deals with this in their gardens, I'm sure, as well. Not everyone has uniform, beautiful, loamy soils like they seem to in England.
Oh, that's right. And in Canberra, of course, we have clay that sits about 2 centimetres underneath the topsoil.
That's right, which is great for your drainage, not. So I guess what can we do in a design sense to deal with some of those difficult soils?
We want to have a look at, because your soils become more difficult if you have poor drainage issues. So you're either going to have sort of boggy spaces that are just depleting the soils, or they're just running off and eroding.
Yeah.
So we want to create spaces where you can kind of contain the soils and then ameliorate the soil. And ameliorate means fix it. So that is, get the gypsum in there, get good organic matter.
Mix in some sand if it's really clayey.
That's it. Do it. You've just
compost, organic matter, all of that will help with your drainage.
Do a soil test.
Yeah, good idea. Good idea.
Google what the soil test is. It's very simple. Anyone can do it at home, just to get a sense of what sort of soil you have and therefore how to remedy it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess rock is the other thing, because you'll often encounter a chunk of rock where you least expected it when you're digging something in a garden. And I guess it's a bit like slope, I was thinking. Rock can actually be it can offer an opportunity, I never thought I'd have a rock garden right here, but I'm going to have to create one now.
Yeah.
And creating something around that rather than treating it as a problem.
Yes, actually, this just comes back to me. I was listening to a symposium the other day, and a landscape architect, James Basson, said this. It came to me, it was, what does this landscape want to be? And he was talking about landscape memory.
Wouldn't it be nice if it just said, I'd love to be a little native garden, madam?
Yeah. I identify as an English garden.
Yeah, that's right.
Even though I'm in the centre of Australia.
Yeah, that's right, even though I look like a bit of a desolate desert oasis.
Well, if you're, like most people whose gardens don't tell you what they want to be, but, by looking at saying, well, what does this landscape, what is in its memory, and what does it want to be? And then that comes back to that question where you said, look, well, if I've got this space, then maybe I should return it to what it should be. So if it is a dry, rocky area, maybe that's a wonderful space to have really shallow-rooted native sprawling ground covers, creating
succulent gardens,
succulents. Just look at what are you working with, and then use and choose the plants and materials that augment that. Don't
try and fix it. Work with what you got.
Yeah.
Which is what we're all doing every day anyway. Yep. Every time you put clothes on and the pants don't fit just like they used to. We're working with what we've got.
We're working with it.
That's right. That's exactly right. So is there anything else that you wanted to just quickly wrap up around how we might deal with problems in our gardens through design solutions?
Well, really, I think the key thing is observation. So this is a great time of year while things are still a bit bare, is observe the garden and identify what it is, the environmental issues that you're struggling with. Have a look at them and say, what are ways that I can work with that problem without necessarily having to put a lot of energy in it. If you're putting energy and expense and resources into it, then you're probably not working with the problem.
And that was exactly what I was going to say as well. So whether it's that encroaching plant from another garden, how can you incorporate that and sort of yield to what it's doing to you, but make it work for you? Yes. Same with that dry or damp spot that has never really worked. How can you look at it differently and go, actually, I'm going to turn that into something where I'm not fighting it all the time? I think that's probably really the takeouts from this, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it is. It is. And, because we're encouraging home gardeners here to have a good look at their design problems. And most home gardeners want a DIY solution.
Yes.
And if you look and you actually give yourself that permission to say, let's work with what we have and let's see how we can tweak this to make it beautiful and to make me feel happy and joyful, then I think we're really winning.
I think that's right. But I think we've got to be really careful that we don't get caught up in I desperately wanted an English country garden, so I'm going to have one no matter what, when you're actually in a spot that's not really going to ever lend itself to that. I think that's probably the key thing that has come out of this. So we're talking next, we've already flagged that we're going to be talking about a similar thing, but this time it's going to be about the structural problems. So give us a sneak peek, Fleur.
Yes, so these are the sort of things we do to ourselves, like the Colorbond fence.
This is when we've been trying to fix the environmental problems and it hasn't quite worked.
That's right. These are all the man-made. The things we go, oh my gosh, I've got to try and hide that. I've got to try and conceal these things.
I can see myself out under that tree, sitting in that beautifully, courtyarded area that never then ends up actually happening.
That's right. A lot of wasted spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is pretty exciting. So in the meantime, people can subscribe to our podcast and they can also find us on Instagram and Facebook. And I guess it's our 4th episode, so we're really keen to get some feedback. Are we hitting the mark for you? Or is there anything you really want to hear about that we could talk about, or anyone you really want to hear from, say, in our local community? Because we don't have the pulling power. Just don't ask us for Harry Styles because he's not going to respond. And I don't think he's that interested in gardens anyway.
No, we've got some pretty good personalities that we're looking towards interviewing in the future anyway. But we would love to hear from you anyway, just to get a sense of the things that you're struggling with. And remember, we're really talking about design elements and garden design, not horticultural solutions. Yeah. And, we're not a gardening podcast. We're a garden design podcast.
That's right. And if you want to know the difference, listen to our podcast from
Episode 2.
Yeah, that's right, where we actually talk about the difference between the professions. But we're going to wrap up now, and we'll talk to you again in a fortnight when we talk more design solutions for problems.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to speaking to you then, Sach.
Talk to you then.
Bye.